now. Raywat, good to have you with us. Thanks so very much for joining us.
My pleasure as always.
We are starting to and expecting that formal announcement, the okay for Pfizer for our children. What will that mean as soon as we can start getting jabs into arms in the weeks ahead as we approach the holiday season, that more and more of our children will be vaccinated in this country?
Oh, it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. The single largest contiguous block of non-immune people are children, and that's why we're seeing so many cases in schools right now. That's probably what's driving the epidemic in many parts of the country. So this changes that dynamic substantially. Now the question is, well, two questions, frankly. One is how many parents will be quick to accept vaccination for the kids, and the second is how quickly will that happen such that we have sufficient immunity come the holiday season to prevent outbreaks in family gatherings.
Do you get the sense that while some parents will quickly get the vaccine for themselves, they feel differently about their children?
Oh, totally, and I understand that. I completely understand that as a parent. Like, I look at my child's vaccination schedule, and I'm entirely pro-vaccine, but I look at the stuff he's being injected with, and even I feel a little queasy sometimes. So, our kids are special, and we would tolerate a lot more for ourselves in terms of risk than we are for our exquisitely precious children.
I guess, what is the biggest piece of misinformation that you would like to correct for those parents who might be feeling that way, as you say, a little queasy right now?
Well, I mean, there isn't one single piece of misinformation, but among them are things like the vaccines affect your germ line, meaning you pass on this vaccine to your children later on through your DNA. That is not true. Or that the vaccine compromises your fertility. That is not true. Or the vaccine doesn't work. It totally works. It just doesn't work perfectly. So you should not read into the case numbers that always show that some vaccine people are getting sick, that the vaccine is not worth it. It's totally worth it. One of the conversations here is, are children less likely to get sick with this disease? Yeah, it looks like they are. Therefore, is it not worth getting the vaccine? No, I don't think so, because this variant is so hypertransmissible that the chances of your child getting the disease are much higher now than any other point in the pandemic, probably. Therefore, the chances of having an adverse outcome is also quite high. So I advise people to strongly consider getting this vaccination for their children. It will help not just them, but helps the community tremendously.
Are kids already getting any mRNA vaccines as part of their regular schedule? Because I know some people will say, I'd rather have the viral vector versus mRNA. There's a sentence I never thought I'd say in my parents.
mRNA vaccines for people is a relatively new experience in the world, so I'm not aware of any existing mRNA vaccines given to children. I'd be shocked if, in fact, that was the case already. So no, that's not the case. But if people want to wait for a viral vector vaccine for the children, I suppose that's a possibility. And I know that there's some discussions in some circles about reintroducing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine specifically for the hesitant. But they have not been cleared for pediatric use in this country or in the USA yet. So that's not a possibility right now.
With Raywat Deonandan from the University of Ottawa, Richard and Julie with you on 680 CJOB. We've focused in a lot on Canada. We're starting to see that uptick in the United States. But worldwide, where are the COVID hotspots, and where are we starting to see COVID no longer being a factor? Is that anywhere?
Well, that's a loaded question. Some of the hotspots include Russia, and Moscow might be going into some kind of lockdown soon. And their problem is entirely lack of confidence in vaccines, so the uptake is quite small. Where is it going away? Well, Gibraltar has a high vaccination rate. And so they're opening up their society. Portugal famously has a high vaccination rate, so their society is opened up. To say it's going away somewhere, that is a difficult question to answer. Bhutan did very, very well, but Bhutan has been really responsible throughout this entire pandemic. It's not just about vaccination. It's about overall public health scrutiny and responsibility and overall public compliance with public health messaging. And Bhutan has done that tremendously well.
This week is anti-bullying week, and you may have heard the news story that I read in the 4:30 news, where the Canadian Medical Association is urging the Liberal government to follow through on a campaign promise to bring in criminal charges for those who harass healthcare workers or block access to clinics and hospitals. Earlier today, the other epidemiologist we frequently speak to, Cynthia Carr in Winnipeg, talked about some of her experiences and how her son goes to the mailbox to get the mail because of what she receives. Is that something that has happened to you either online or in some facet of quote unquote real life?
Oh yes, it's an endless stream of hate mail and occasional threats. Having said that, the amount of supportive messages I get far outnumber the hateful ones. But the hateful ones you remember because they are troubling. And I tell myself it's due to people being afraid, and some people don't have the emotional maturity to process fear and uncertainty, so they lash out at the only recognizable figure they see as representing the thing that is causing them some distress, and that's usually the epidemiologist on TV or on the radio. But it's one thing to accept that it's caused by fear. It's another thing to live with it when you have, a young child at home and a spouse, and you're worried about their safety. It is a problem, and we have a lot of reckoning to do the next few months and years as we dissect the implications of this pandemic in terms of trust, in terms of safety, in terms of civic behavior.
If you look at those messages, although I'm sure extremely painful to look at, if you look at them through an academic lens, can you glean anything from them for future policies? Or you can work with policymakers and say, this is what happens when you don't provide information X or handle it in this way.
This is what happens if you do not combat disinformation that's coming out of certain political corners with a fair amount of aggression. We let that sentiment percolate far too well before the pandemic happened. There was already hate percolating, and the pandemic just opened the floodgates for certain people to express their hate in undesirable ways. So what we need to do moving forward, I think, is when we see incorrect things being shared in certain political circles, social circles, intervene with a corrective measure, usually better information. We have a lot to do in terms of science literacy in this country and around the world, not just for children and students, but for adults as well. And everyone's got a role to play in this. Media, educators, friends, relatives, everybody.
Raywat Deonandan, we always appreciate you joining us, and we thank you so very much. Stay well. And I know the positive really does outweigh the negative. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.